He's the best there is at what he does, but if you're looking for the best Wolverine comics for beginners, then this is the video for you. Woof. Hey guys, it's me Marcus, aka the Mad Dog, and we're back with another video. Kicking this video off, I'm gonna go with one of the more iconic picks, because it's Weapon X. And this reads more like an 80s slasher movie with Logan being the killer that they're all trying to get away from. You get to see him being experimented on a bit, and also when he gets unleashed for the first time, and I just think it'd be perfect for new fans. And that's because it's set before he has to carry much of the weight of the X-Men, and you don't even really need to know a lot about Logan going into this. You've also got beautiful art because Smith's style is so distinct, even if I did think that he drew the claws a little bit too small on that one cover, and it's the only thing that I can notice every time I see it. And I just think this is one of the best books if you want to see the pure destructive force that Logan can be. There is also that element of tragedy because you know that he's been experimented on and just pushed to his absolute breaking point. But if this is what we get as a result of that, then, you know, test away on him. I've read this twice and it got even better the second time because it's one of those ideas that's simple in concept but more complex in execution. And even for a young modern reader today, this doesn't read like something from the early 90s. There's a reason this is still a go-to, referenced, and even reprinted all the way up until this day because it's such a phenomenal jumping on point when it comes to Wolverine. This was also included in the third volume of the omnibuses at Marvel's printing, and they recently just came out with volume 5. And if this is the way that you wanted to get into Wolverine, or you just wanted to pick up any other books, then you can get them for a little bit less with the discount codes that we've got from the channel sponsors. If you're in the EU, we've got Comics Bugle, and for everybody else, there's organic price books. They've got great packaging, fast shipping, and amazing customer services, and if you use code WOOF, you'll get $2 off your order. And if you're ordering 3 or more books and you want them to be delivered together, make sure you use code WOOF, ship it together for 5% off your entire order. Don't worry, you can just copy and paste them from the description down below, and you can use these codes as many times as you like. And if all of that sounded great but you're in the EU and you want free shipping and free gifts with every order, then the only place that you need to go is Comics Bugle. They've been a massive support to this channel over the last year, and they can be to you as well, because if you use code WOOF, you can get 3% off all items that aren't already in a sale. So get your orders in. Okay, I'm gonna go with another biggie here because it's Wolverine by Jason Aaron. And the reason why I'm recommending this so early on is because yeah, you can jump into the full thing and read it start to finish, but this is also one of those picks that you could just jump into a few different story arcs if you did want something a bit shorter. Do you want to see Logan stop an underground movement in Japan? This has you covered. Do you want to see his soul transported to the underworld? Again, this has you covered. Looking for a story where Logan leads his own team and has to run a school? Well, we'll get onto that later. But even going back to the early days when he was writing in that series that was started by Greg Rucka, you've got the Mystique storyline, which is a clear standout. And the Weapon X series that followed it was fantastic, and it all just felt like textbook Wolverine but for a modern era. So it may well be the case that not every storyline in here is going to be an absolute slam dunk for you, but there's so many different Wolverine stories throughout Jason Aaron's time with the character that it's impossible for there not to be at least one that you like. You know what, I touched on it then, so why not expand on it here? Because it's Wolverine by Greg Rucka. To me, this is probably one of the most underrated Wolverine runs, and it was one of my faves, so I do hold it in quite high regard. Even though this did come out 20 years ago, it is still very accessible for a new reader, because it isn't super bogged down by what was going on with the rest of the X-Men at this time, or even really what Logan had been doing just before this. Marvel Knights was trying to get new readers in, people who may not have touched any of these characters before. It's tense, but with a healthy amount of action that's thrown into the mix, and lasted for about 20 or so issues, so there's enough here to really sink your claws into, but you're not going to need to schedule an entire month off to read this. But the art is primarily done by Derek Robertson, so if you like the same style as Transmetropolitan or The Boys, then really think about checking this one out. There's also a great battle with Sabretooth that in my opinion is one of the best, and is worth checking out this run for alone. But hey, look, I know so far I've been recommending stuff that's at least 8 issues long, which might be too long for some people, in which case the 3-issue miniseries that was done by Brian K. Vaughan would be perfect for you. This is one of those suggestions that you could easily get done in one sitting, and you get to learn about Wolverine's time in Japan before he was ever a member of the X-Men, because he's tracing the steps back in the modern day. So you kind of get the best of both worlds here, because you do get some action with him where he's wearing his regular costume. And story-wise, don't get me wrong, I don't think it's going to blow your mind or completely reinvent who you think Wolverine is, but it's got this great yet abstract style from Eduardo Risso. And if you've read any of Brian K. Vaughan's previous titles like Why the Last Man, Saga or Paper Girls, you know that there's going to be a big end of issue 1 stinger. And I love the one that was in here. It actually made me wish that this was going to be longer. So if you are new to Wolverine, what better than a book that's going to get you up to scratch with who he is and also make you want to explore further stories with him. Next up, I'm going with Wolverine by Mark Millar. Now, this may be a sweeping generalization, but I can't imagine that I'm the only person who picks up a Wolverine book when you just want some dumb fun action. If you're the same, then Mark Millar's a name that you definitely need to get behind. In particular, I'm talking about the Enemy of the State arc because Old Man Logan is kind of its own thing that's also going to appear in this video anyway. But if you're pretty much looking for something that's Wolverine tries to kill the Marvel Universe, then Mark Millar has you covered. But then as the series goes on, you get to see him get revenge and try to take on the people that got him to tear apart the Marvel Universe. And this book's kind of in that sweet spot, especially if you're a fan of the movies, because it's not going to take up dozens of issues telling you about his origin story, because let's be honest, you might already know it if you've watched a few of the films, but it's still not afraid of mixing it with other characters from the Marvel Universe. It's also got art from John Romita Jr., but at a time before when I'd sigh whenever I'd see his name, and one complaint that I hear about Millar is that his books never seem to have substance, and people tend to just write him off whenever they see his name on a book, but at the same time, those type of people are the ones that I don't go to when I'm looking to enjoy a comic. You know what? I'm going to carry this on with Old Man Logan. Now, I get the argument that an alternate universe endpoint for a character isn't really the best of introductions, but what you do have here is a short, enjoyable standalone story that then eventually got revived and found a way to fold itself into the regular 616 universe. Because you've got the original arc from the late 2000s that was written by Mark Millar and illustrated by Steve McNiven, which is just a fun action story that reads similar to an Elseworlds tale. I had a great time when I reviewed it a few months ago and it still holds up today, and I do actually think there's a lot more depth to it than you'd originally think. But when Secret Wars happened and Jeff Lemire started a new ongoing run, the real power behind this character was fully realised by giving us a present day revenge story where he's going after the villains of his universe, and to me that's just a concept that's too good to fail. This became its own part of the Wolverine legacy and found a way to introduce new readers into this character through a slightly different route. So if you wanted a short story that's set apart from everything else, then Millar has you covered. But if you wanted a longer run that's more integrated into the wider world, then the Resurrection after Secret Wars is the one for you. Yep, let's do some more double dipping, because I'm going with Wolverine and the X-Men. Yeah, I gave Aaron the spotlight earlier on in this video, but Wolverine and the X-Men deserves its own pick. And you might want something that's a completely different pace. You might know that Wolverine is this berserker mode killer that can take out everybody in a room, but you want to see more in a leadership role. You want to see that evolution of the character and who he can become with the right nurturing, or just after a fight with Cyclops. So it won't start you at day one for the character, but you get to see him as he's trying to found his own school and teach the next generation, in the wake of the X-Men splitting and Logan's determination to keep the dream of Charles Xavier going. So it's the same Wolverine that you know and love, set in the regular Marvel universe, but cast in a different light, and you get to see the deeper levels of the character and really what makes him tick. But there's still a ton of action here and great plots that are some of the best for the character in the modern era. The longer it goes on, the more it does tie into other modern X-Men books from that time, so this is also a great jumping on point if you did eventually want to branch into the rest of the X-Men. The battery died. Okay, now I'm really going to go in a different direction because I'm going to recommend All New Wolverine. If I was recommending purely Logan titles, then this one wouldn't be on here, but this is where to start Wolverine and not where to start Logan. And let's just be honest, I'm doing all that damage control, but the comic book Karens are probably already crying just at the mention of Laura, because this was a 35 issue run that was written by Tom Taylor that respected the legacy that was left by Logan by having his daughter try to step out from his shadow. You also get a complete story here with a beginning, a middle and an end, which you can't often say for many modern series. And if you did want some pure unadulterated Loganness, then the Generations Wolverine and All New Wolverine was one of the best issues in this entire run. Again, it's set in Japan when Wolverine was at his prime, but it doesn't really get too in depth into how this even came to be. You're supposed to just enjoy this for what it is, and it hits quite an emotional core at the end of it that shows all the different angles of Logan. But the main run is still really enjoyable throughout. I loved it when I reviewed it a few years ago, and you pretty much get appearances from all the major figures within the regular Marvel universe during the All New era, including Old Man Logan, so I think just looking at it from a percentage standpoint, this omnibus has more Wolverines in it than most do. Okay, if we're going with cheap picks, I might as well throw this next one in because it's pretty much every X-Men book since Wolverine had his debut. Calling Wolverine the most popular member of the X-Men would be an understatement, although I've always been more of a Colossus guy, and for as much as I can recommend individual stories and series, some of his best moments videos have been whilst he's been a part of the X-Men. From the early days in giant-sized X-Men where he was finding his feet within the team, to the Dark Phoenix saga where you had that entire moment with the Hellfire Club, God Loves Man Kills, his wedding during From the Ashes, New X-Men, Astonishing X-Men, and especially the events like Mutant Massacre, Age of Apocalypse, House of M, and I could stay here all day listing off titles. So it's probably a good job that one of the first videos that I did in this series was where to start on the X-Men. These days, it's harder to find an X-Men book where Wolverine isn't one of the main characters than it is to find one where he is, so you might as well just take your pick. So if you do prefer a team-based book, or maybe you're already well versed with the mutant side of the Marvel Universe, but you've somehow never really dived into Wolverine, which I don't even know how that's possible, but I want to make sure that I cater for every option, then there's no better way to get introduced to Wolverine than the team that put him at the forefront in the first place. Hulk, I'm sorry. But if you did want a team-based book but you don't want to dive into the massive world of the X-Men, then I'm going to throw a bit of a curveball and go with the New Avengers. Yep, again, I'm showing me bias here because this was one of the first books that I read when I was getting into comics, but then again, it's YouTube. How can I make one of these lists and not show a bit of bias? And at first you might be thinking that he was just thrown in here so that they could put him on the front cover for the first couple of issues and get gullible new readers like myself to pick it up, but he is a staple of this team and he is as important to it as Captain America, Iron Man, or any of the other big names that you'd come to expect. Bendis, for as much flack as he gets, knew the characters that he was writing during this time, so he's got a variety of different personalities that he can bounce off while still being the Wolverine that you know and love. I love this run, I have ever since I was a kid, and Wolverine is a huge part of the reason why. And I also love how they might have slapped him on the front cover just to get in gullible new readers, but if you look at the first hardcover, he is literally here. You would have to fold this out just to know that he might be in this book. Okay, I'm gonna go with another controversial one, and hopefully you guys will hear me out, because I'm gonna go with Civil War Wolverine. But Mad Dog, how can this be a great jumping on point without reading Civil War? Well, one, you're asking the wrong person because I don't hate Civil War as much as people who haven't even read it in 15 years. And secondly, because you only need to know the bare minimum about Civil War for this to be enjoyable. In the wake of a supervillain attack, Wolverine is tasked with hunting down those that were responsible and have gone into hiding, and it will send him on a journey that will put him directly into the crosshairs of Namor, the Sentry, and even a government conspiracy. So yeah, it's not going to tell you the history of Wolverine or even hold your hand much as it goes through the messy continuity of the Marvel Universe during the 2000s. But the Wolverine Civil War tie-in is a really fun, balls-to-the-wall story that's hard not to enjoy, but you might have overlooked because of the fact that it is an event tie-in, even if the artist does make Wolverine look way shorter than his 5'2" frame. But for as many team and solo titles that Wolverine's had and been a part of, he's had more than his fair share of crossovers as well. These are normally great if you want a shorter story or you've got another character within the Marvel Universe that you already like, because in the past he's had crossovers with the Punisher, Ghost Rider, Blade, of course you've got the Hulk, individual members of the X-Men, and one that I particularly want to highlight, Peter Parker. The Astonishing Spider-Man and Wolverine was a 6-issue miniseries that was written by Jason Aaron and illustrated by Adam Kubert. But like I said at the beginning, there's been plenty of crossovers with other characters that you could jump into if you like one of those. You've even got crossovers with some of the Top Cow characters if that's your thing. And yeah, Wolverine in the Darkness, that looks pretty badass. And if you're looking for something to get you ready for the upcoming Deadpool and Wolverine movie, which honestly, yeah, is the reason why I'm making this video now, a new series recently started called World War III that was written by Joe Kelly, so you've got somebody who's got a good knowledge of both of these characters, and has phenomenal art once again from Adam Kubert. I promise he's not the only one who's allowed to illustrate crossover books. You know what, I might as well put this one here because I haven't really got much organisation, but I'm just gonna go with the other team books that feature Wolverine. Because yeah, I've recommended the X-Men and the New Avengers, but Wolverine is that popular of a character that if you have some kind of small town football team, there's a very real chance that Logan might be a part of it. So you can look behind the huge go-to titles and dive into something like Rick Remender's The Uncanny X-Force, or X-Force by Kyle and Yost, or The Savage Avengers by Jerry Dugan. I'm also a big advocate for the Ultimate X-Men, well, at least the first part of it. So it very well may be the case that there's a different team book that might be more up your alley than some of the bigger suggestions that I've already recommended. And some of these stories that can have a smaller cast of characters can often shine more of a spotlight onto each member, or they may just be dealing with a non-world ending threat that can help you understand who these characters are a little bit more. Next up, and taking a bit of a left turn, I'm gonna suggest the animated series. And also there's a lot of recency bias, but also nostalgia that's going into this pick because X-Men 97 really hit the spot for me, and reminded me of just how influential the original animated series was to me when I was growing up. That show on Fox Kids was a huge reason why I ended up getting so invested in both the X-Men and Wolverine, and I still think it's a great recommendation today. What's best about this series is that it does feature Logan quite heavily, but it's not like one of those later animated shows where it's pretty much Wolverine and occasionally featuring the X-Men. You also get to experience some of the greatest stories that have come from the comics, and it's kind of like a greatest hits of the X-Men and Wolverine that you can watch whilst eating your dinner, or if you're like me, whilst you're in the bath having a cry. And although the 90s series will always be the supreme one to me, there's also great Wolverine based moments in X-Men Evolution, Wolverine and the X-Men, which the title should probably be a giveaway, and especially the Wolverine anime. So yeah, this pick might not be a comic, but it'd be incredibly short-sighted of me to not acknowledge how important some of these shows can be if you do want to eventually get invested in Wolverine. Okay, I'm gonna cop some flack for this next one, but it's always been a tradition in me where to start series that I recommend the first run that I ever read for that character. And when it comes to Wolverine, the first solo series of his that I read was done by Daniel Way. With the benefit of hindsight, yeah, this run doesn't do everything right, and it does take more than a few liberties, but sometimes diving into a run that takes a few risks and doesn't always stick the landing with them can be more interesting than going for a run that is pretty much just textbook. So I always feel that the level of enjoyment that you can get from this run depends on how much you can suspend your disbelief. But Way really burrows into the forgotten history of Wolverine, especially with his origin series that went on for a good number of years. And through his time with Logan, you get to see him interact with characters that you wouldn't often get to do so, like Black Widow, Captain America, and some of the more forgotten members of the X-Men. So yeah, this run won't be for everybody, and I already know that the comic book Karens are going to be complaining at the sheer mention of putting it on this list, but then again, it's not like it impacts your life in any way. All I'm saying is this was quite fun and enjoyable when I read this as a teenager, and there might be somebody in your life that would get the benefit of reading this. Okay, my penultimate pick, and probably the most recent one that I can give if you want a longer run, but I'm going with Wolverine by Benjamin Percy. Yep, if you wanted something more recent, then until Hickman gets a few issues under his belt, this is going to be your best bet, but there is a bit more of a commitment that goes into it. I read the first couple of arcs, and it's so heavily connected to the X-Force title that was going on at the same time that it might be a bit cumbersome if you did want to jump into this. Because from what I read, it is a bit of a slow burner, but as it gets going, it's got its own mini events that were going on within it, and it doesn't shy away from the existing continuity if it is that maybe you knew a bit about the Krakoa era and you just want to dive into something that's coming out today. But those early issues that I did read were still entertaining, and I think they would be worth checking out if you are a new reader that wants to start at what's going on now. But if I'm being honest, either read this digitally and just find a reading order, or wait until an eventual omnibus comes out, because the trade paperbacks only have 4 issues each in them, but we're still pretty much the same price as if there were 6 issues, so to me, that's overpriced. Sorry, Marvel. Before we get into my final pick, I've got a bonus one for you, because it's pretty much every Wolverine series that I haven't mentioned. This guy has been in a significant number of books, and also had a significant number of his own books. It has not been possible for me to read every single one, these are just my personal recommendations. It could very well be the case that the perfect jumping on point for you could be the Savage Wolverine, or the 12-issue series that was done by Paul Cornell, the plethora of miniseries that took place between the 80s and the 90s, and even the Hickman and Capullo series that was recently announced. When that starts rolling, it could very well be the case that that would be a perfect jumping on point. Although with that one, admittedly, I'd probably wait a bit, because it might very well be the case that you need to understand 20 years of Marvel just to be reading it. He tends to go quite big scale with his concepts. But for my final pick, how could it not be on here? Because it's Wolverine by Claremont and Millar. The Hulk may have introduced us to him, and the X-Men may have made him a big name, but this 4-issue 1982 miniseries showed us exactly why he is the best that there is at what he does. This is very much written in the style of the time, so if it is that you enjoy that Bronze Age of storytelling, then this is definitely one that you should be checking out. But even if you don't want to read everything that followed this, the first 4 issues alone give you enough of a story so that you can feel like you've been introduced to Wolverine as a character. You get time with Logan in Japan, taking on armies of assassins, going on a rescue mission, and seeing him toy with the idea of possibly embracing love and stepping away from the only life that he's ever really known. There is way more that goes on in here than you think there should be for a 4-issue miniseries, but you can't really go wrong with a book that was written by the guy who knew Wolverine best, and that was illustrated by a Frank Miller during his prime. And I don't feel like this has aged too poorly. Normally I don't recommend the very first series for a character, but but Wolverine was already established by this point, and theoretically from here you could follow this up all the way until the modern day. So despite it pretty much being the least modern run that's going to be on this list, I still think it'd be perfect for new readers. But whether you loved it or hated it, that's the list, and if you're watching this after you've already seen Deadpool 3, then I hope you enjoyed it. I'm really looking forward to that movie. But until next time, just make sure that you stay safe, and stay mad all you dogs. We're both. See you at the next video.